The Big Bang Theory has produced hundreds of fan theories over the years. Some are clever, some are ridiculous, and some manage to be both at the same time. Today I'm ranking my top 10 Big Bang fan theories in order. I want to be clear that these are all in-world theories, meaning can they be explained by the logic of the show within the show. This isn't about whether I think the writers intended them or whether they make sense in the world of the audience. Instead, I'm ranking the theories based on 3 criteria. Number 1, how well they explain or develop the world. Number 2, how much of the world they affect, in other words, their scale. And number 3, how much sense they actually make when you look at the evidence. Before we get into this video, I wanted to quickly mention that next week's video will be on the top 50 minor characters of the Big Bang Theory. Any character who makes multiple appearances in the show will be on this video, and it's going to be a lot of fun, so make sure you don't miss it next Thursday. Also, as you can see, I'm taking a break from filming this week, so it's just my voice in this video, but next week I'll be back on screen with this minor characters video. Anyway, back to the Big Bang fan theories, and we're starting off at number 10. This is one of those theories that starts as a joke and, well, ends as a joke, but somehow refuses to die. I knew it wasn't going to score highly, but it narrowly made it onto my top 10 list. Bernadette the cyborg theory is based on the idea that Bernadette's character's shift in the show isn't just development. Early Bernadette is scientifically driven, polite, and surprisingly gentle. Later Bernadette becomes assertive, aggressive, intensely competitive, and motivated more by money than by science. And at times she becomes coldly efficient in how she deals with people, not to mention there's that shift in her voice. And because the change feels so extreme, some fans jokingly suggest that she was replaced or rebuilt into a different version of herself. At first it sounds ridiculous, and look, it is, which is why it is only in 10th place, but part of what keeps the theory alive is how sharply Bernadette's personality escalates. Most people don't use the cyborg label literally, it's more of a metaphor for how abruptly her personality seems to upgrade, like a software patch that didn't just fix bugs, but rewrote the entire system. Of course, the outer-world answer is that the character was gradually rewritten by the writers to fit new storylines, especially after she became more central to the group dynamic, and after her relationship with Howard developed. But we're focusing on in-world theories. Instead of saying the writing changed, it reframes it as Bernadette herself changing over time. There's a sub-theory that Howard designed Bernadette the cyborg. This does link nicely to the Robot Hand episode, and if you remember, the gang actually wrote down Robot Girlfriend as a project idea, which we discover when Leonard is skimming through an old notebook. But I think we can agree, despite Howard's engineering skills, to make such convincing pseudo-human programming is a bit far-fetched. And in 2010, when Bernadette meets Howard, or even today, the idea that anyone could create such a convincing cyborg is too far-fetched, even in a world of geniuses. More importantly, this theory doesn't really add anything valuable to the world, but it does highlight something interesting about how different Bernadette feels between seasons, and it also tells us about how a lot of people view her as a character. It's one of the show's most famous fan theories, and it's a fun way to start off the video. In 9th place we have quite a dark but more realistic theory. Raj's trauma theory proposes that Raj's inability to speak to women in the first few seasons stems from some form of profound trauma earlier in life, most likely psychosexual in nature. Psychologically, that's highly plausible. People often develop unusual coping mechanisms following significant traumatic experiences. I would even say to an extent that the theory is probable. I think some level of trauma could easily have happened, and perhaps the trauma was so significant he had to escape, move away from his friends and family, and move abroad. It also explains why Raj allows people to repeatedly make fun of him. It explains why he often chooses romantic partners who are not always healthy for him. It is common for people who have been through sexual trauma to blame and even punish themselves. The theory is disturbing, but it does make a lot of sense. The reason it's only in 9th place comes down to scale. It only explains one aspect of one character, but it does add a layer of depth to Raj. In the very first episode, Penny mentions that she is working on a screenplay based on her life. The screenplay theory suggests the entire show is actually a screenplay written by Penny. Normally I'd hate this. Generally, I don't like theories that erase reality. But this one has a certain elegance. Penny would absolutely write herself into the story. She would absolutely exaggerate these bizarre scientists she met across the hall, and somehow it feels oddly fitting. And there's an alternative screenplay theory that suggests anything after the pilot episode is the screenplay. So Penny, who was struggling to write something compelling, met the 4 main characters and then used their eccentricity to write a sitcom called The Big Bang Theory. And if I might suggest a third theory, the story itself and all its events are real, but Penny only makes friends with the characters to help her with the screenplay she's working on. At some point, she accidentally falls in love with Leonard and grows fond of the other characters. The sitcom homeostasis theory argues that the world of the Big Bang actively resists major change. Characters can grow, relationships can develop, and important events can happen, but the universe always finds a way to pull things back towards a familiar equilibrium. Think about how many times the characters seem on the verge of completely changing their lives. Raj repeatedly comes close to becoming independent, only to find himself back in familiar patterns. Howard goes from immature bachelor to husband, father and astronaut, yet somehow still feels trapped by the same insecurities and flaws. Sheldon, Leonard, Penny, everyone, they all evolve remarkably slowly and make the same mistakes repeatedly. So the theory suggests this isn't just sitcom television writing, it's an actual law of the Big Bang universe itself. Whenever a character begins moving too far away from their established role, reality subtly pushes back. The world of the Big Bang tries to keep them stuck because it knows if they evolve too much, the show and therefore the world will ultimately end, leading to some kind of Big Bang, I suppose. This theory doesn't explain why sitcoms stay the same. We already know the real world answer to that. Obviously the writers want to keep the characters consistent, and they want the show to run for as long as possible. But the theory is interesting because it takes a standard writing convention and transforms it into a law of nature within the Big Bang Theory universe itself. Suddenly, Leonard and Penny's repeated relationship problems aren't just relationship problems. Raj's inability to move forward isn't just bad luck. Stuart's endless setbacks aren't just a running joke. They're all symptoms of a universe that wants things to stay exactly as they are. Instead of watching sitcom characters living sitcom lives, we're watching ordinary people trapped inside a sitcom machine, desperately trying to escape. They're fighting against the very rules of their reality. And for me, that's what elevates this theory, a theory which would otherwise have failed to make the top 10 list. Most fan theories explain a mystery, some explain a character, and a few explain a storyline. The sitcom homeostasis theory attempts to explain the physics of the entire world. The more you think about this theory, the deeper and darker it gets. It makes you think about your own life. It makes you ask questions like, are we holding ourselves back, or is the universe we occupy holding us back? Many have linked the universe's desire to keep things the same to Sheldon's fear of change, and so a sub-theory is that the world around them is Sheldon's mind. It directly reflects his mind, and you can go down a complete rabbit hole here. But if nothing else, the sitcom homeostasis theory is just another way to watch the show, and it's a pretty interesting one. Here is another broad theory. Order-chaos theory is interesting because it's the idea that the Big Bang Theory is structured like a system trying to stabilize itself. On the order side, you've got everything the characters start with: rigid routines, intellectual certainty, repetition, and control. Sheldon is the clearest example, of course, with the rules for everything, fixed seating, strict schedules, emotional avoidance. But Leonard, Howard and Raj also begin the series in highly structured lives, with predictable work patterns, predictable friendships, weekly trips to the comic book store, and limitations in how they see themselves. Then chaos enters in the form of relationships, emotional risk and unpredictability. Science and nerd culture equals order, romance and love equals chaos. The theory becomes interesting because it reframes each character arc as a controlled collision between these two forces. Sheldon doesn't just grow up, he's repeatedly forced into moments where emotional chaos breaks through his systems, and he has to rebuild them slightly differently. Leonard isn't just unlucky and then lucky in love, he's constantly pulled between wanting stable order, acceptance, routine, belonging, and chaotic emotional vulnerability, jealousy, insecurity, impulsive attachment. When one force dominates too much, something in the show pushes it back into equilibrium. By the finale, the characters have finally found the perfect balance between order and chaos, between science and love, between thought and feeling, between what can be understood through equations and books, and what can be understood through experience and touch. It's a social experiment into different types of people coming together. The ending of the show can only happen when the forces of order and chaos, of science and love, are perfectly balanced. I think the theory is elegant, and it explains a lot about every relationship in the Big Bang Theory. The reason it's not in the top 5 is because as a theory it feels quite abstract and poetic. It isn't grounded in much hard evidence, and it also doesn't explain much beyond the show's basic storyline and the basic emotions behind characters' choices. To me, it's a half-formed theory, with a lot of potential. It could maybe be developed into a great theory, but for now, it comes in at number 6. One of the biggest mysteries in the whole series is Howard's father's letter, which remains unopened after Howard receives it on his 18th birthday. In Season 6, Episode 19, Sheldon discovers the contents of the letter and is tricked into revealing it to everyone else, because everyone is so curious. Howard is curious too, but scared to know what it says. He feels understandably angry at his dad for abandoning them, and therefore doesn't think he deserves the opportunity to explain himself. But he is conflicted. He both does and doesn't want to know what the letter says, but his friends come up with an idea. They all read him him different versions of what the letter says. We are told only one is true. That way, he knows what his dad said, but doesn't know which version is correct. Discounting Sheldon's story, which fans agree was just made up, that leaves us with 5 different versions of what the letter could be. Raj said it was a simple 18th birthday card saying, "Happy birthday Howard, I love you, Dad." Amy said the letter revealed that Howard's dad secretly attended his graduation and sat in the auditorium, and that he cried because of how proud he was. Penny said the letter explained that his father wasn't who he claimed to be, his other life caught up with him, and leaving was the only way to keep Howard and his mother safe. According to Leonard, his dad wrote that family is the most important thing, and warned Howard never to throw it away like he did. And lastly, Bernadette said inside the envelope was a picture of Howard's dad holding him on the day he was born. On the back it read, "Howard, my son, my greatest gift." Now, according to this fragmented letter theory, it was all true. They were all different parts of the same letter. The more I've thought about this theory, the more it makes sense. It's actually very clever. It was a way of telling Howard exactly what was in the letter without him ever realizing. I also think it's unlikely that his dad would write to him on his 18th birthday just to tell him any one of these things. I think it's unlikely you'd write to your son after years just to say happy birthday, or just to explain he wasn't who he said he was, or any of the other things individually. I think it would be more heartfelt and detailed than that. Not only does this theory tell us about Howard and the mystery surrounding his father, but actually it tells us about more than Howard. It tells us his friends and his wife care about him enough to devise this creative way of telling him the truth. It brings an awful lot of depth and emotion to the show, and I think it's very plausible, even likely, that this is true. And so the fragmented letter theory, as I've named it, sits in 5th place. As a little bonus, and because this episode of The Big Bang was so popular, certainly one of my favourites, I've recreated my best guess as to what I think the letter might have said. Here it is. Dear Howard, enclosed is a photograph taken on the day you were born. It's been one of my most treasured possessions. On the back, you'll find the words I wrote that day, and I meant every word. I know you probably have questions about why I left. You deserve answers, although I doubt any answer will ever be good enough. The truth is that I wasn't entirely who I claimed to be. There were parts of my life that I kept hidden, mistakes that followed me for years. Eventually that life caught up with me, and when it did, I believed that leaving was the only way to keep you and your mother safe. Whether I was right or wrong, I'll never know. What I do know is that every day since then I've wondered if I made the biggest mistake of my life. The day I left, I told myself that one day I would come back and explain everything. Instead, the years passed by. The longer I stayed away, the harder it became to return. Shame has a way of growing larger with time. But even though I wasn't there, I was always thinking about you. I heard about your achievements. I also heard about your love of science and engineering. You didn't know it, but I attended your high school graduation. I sat near the back of the auditorium and watched you walk across the stage. I cried because of how proud I was. There are moments in life when you realise what matters. Sitting in that auditorium, watching the son I barely knew become a man, I realised something that I should have understood much earlier, that family is the most important thing. And if there's one lesson I hope you learn from my mistakes, it's this. Never throw away your family the way I threw away mine. Not a birthday passes without me thinking about you. Happy birthday, Howard. I love you. Dad. This theory is absolutely ridiculous at first, but the more you look at it, the more it makes sense. The idea is that Penny is a spy who was sent to monitor Leonard or Sheldon or both because of their connections to government research, classified science, or incidents like the rocket fuel explosion, or perhaps Leonard's involvement with the North Korean spy Joyce Kim. At first it's just another job for Penny, but over time she develops genuine feelings for Leonard and real friendships with the group as a whole. Now she's trapped between her assignment and her new life. This explains the turbulence in her relationship with Leonard, and its on and off nature. Now in this theory it is proposed that Wyatt might not actually be her dad. That might be a cover. He might be another spy checking up on her. Her whole family could just be a cover. Except that one car ride. But even if they are her real family, Penny could still be a spy. It's more plausible than you might think, and as a story, it's fantastic. And this was actually one of the most popular fan theories out there for a long time. It's basically a romantic spy thriller hidden inside a sitcom. It's one of my favourite theories because it gives us a completely different lens through which to view not only Penny, but the events of the show. But I don't think it necessarily makes the Big Bang Theory any better. It just makes it crazier. For me, Penny the actress and waitress, pharmaceutical sales rep, is interesting enough without making her into a spy. For that reason, this theory scores highly, but narrowly misses out on the top 3. Another Penny theory, but this one is more plausible. At first glance, Penny looks like the most normal person in the Big Bang Theory. She's outgoing and funny, and seems to have grown up in a fairly typical Midwestern environment compared to the rest of the group. She's often positioned as the grounded contrast to Sheldon's rigidity and the group's scientific world. But the more you actually piece together what she says about her past, or what she doesn't say about it, the less normal it starts to feel. The theory suggests that Penny is deliberately presenting a simplified, softened version of her childhood, and that beneath the surface, her background may be significantly more unstable and emotionally complicated than she lets on. The first major piece of evidence is her family structure. We know she has a brother who has been in prison multiple times. We also hear briefly about a sister, once mentioned, never properly developed, never seen, and never really brought up again. Then there are the references to her upbringing itself. Penny occasionally mentions her father in ways that suggest an unconventional household, including comments implying she was treated like a boy when she was younger. These small details hint at a childhood that doesn't neatly match the simple farm girl backstory she often presents. Her romantic history also adds weight to the theory. Before Leonard, Penny's relationship with Kurt is implied to have been emotionally unhealthy and potentially abusive. Combined with references to multiple difficult relationships and unstable life choices, career uncertainty, financial struggles, and repeated starting over narratives, it paints a picture of someone who has experienced more disruption than she openly acknowledges. And then there's the alcoholism. Although it's often played for laughs, Penny drinks quite a lot, and more importantly, she drinks as a coping mechanism, and from what she tells us in various episodes, she's been drinking from a very young age. What's interesting is not any single detail, but the accumulation of them. None of these moments are treated as major plot revelations in the show. They're casual lines, jokes, or passing references. But when you line them up, they begin to form a pattern of emotional instability underneath Penny's confident exterior. This is where the theory becomes compelling. It would also explain why she pursues an acting career, because she has been acting her whole life, downplaying the trauma of her past. This theory simply argues that Penny's personality is a coping mechanism. Her humour, confidence, and social ease are a way of managing a past that is more chaotic and emotionally complex than she wants to fully articulate. It also explains why she often reacts so strongly to vulnerability in others. Penny is frequently the one who recognises emotional distress in the group and responds with surprising empathy. Under this interpretation, that sensitivity doesn't come from simplicity, it comes from experience. Unlike many fan theories, this one doesn't require deep conspiracies or hidden timelines. It doesn't rewrite the universe or introduce secret plots. It just takes what the show already gives us and reads it as incomplete information rather than full disclosure. The theory then goes on to explain that Penny informed on someone, possibly someone connected to her brother, and that her apartment at Los Robles Avenue is therefore her witness protection home. The reason we never learn her surname is because she is told to keep it secret. And yes, I know in one episode we see a parcel addressed to Penny Teller, but the writers did reveal that this was just a joke by the props department, thinking the audience were unlikely to notice, and I think it was clearly just a reference to Penn and Teller. Anyway, I think out of all the backstory theories, this makes the most sense. I don't necessarily think the writers planned it, but this video is about in-world theories, and I think this theory hits the nail on the head. It explains Penny further, fills a lot of gaps, and it also goes some way to explaining her relationship with Leonard, who has a different kind of traumatic upbringing. In Season 3, Episode 22, it is revealed to us that Leonard caused an explosion which ultimately destroyed the elevator. This happened in a flashback when Leonard was relatively new to the building, and in the flashback, Sheldon actually saved Leonard's life by pulling him out of the elevator moments before the rocket fuel explodes. But what if Sheldon planned this all along? What if he somehow had access to the rocket fuel before Leonard's experiment and mixed up the measurements on purpose, knowing that it would cause it to become unstable? As Leonard says in the episode, this is applied physics, and as an experimental physicist, it is unlikely he would get something this important wrong. The theory suggests Sheldon was the cause of the explosion, but why? Well, because he likes the stairs, and therefore wanted people to have no choice but to use them. The theory doesn't explain why he likes the stairs, but I have narrowed it down to 3 possible reasons. A, because of a fear of elevators, falling in with his long list of other fears: clowns, chickens, germs, flying. And to be fair, a fear of elevators is fairly common. We can also see his reluctance to get in the elevator when it's finally fixed. B, because he enjoys the therapeutic, predictable routine of walking up and down the stairs. Or C, my favourite reason, because he secretly wanted Leonard and Penny to get together from the beginning, and he realised the only way that would happen was if there was an excuse for regular interaction between them. Were it not for the broken elevator, so many of their interactions would never have happened, and Leonard and Penny might never have gotten together. Of course, it could be a combination of these theories. But despite its name, the elevator theory is about more than the elevator. It suggests that Sheldon manipulates far more of the world than we realise. It suggests that he is more aware of things like emotions and sarcasm than he lets on. Not maliciously, but strategically, like a game of chess. It would explain why he appears to be more emotionally intelligent in young Sheldon than he is at the beginning of The Big Bang Theory, because he is acting. The evidence is surprisingly strong for this theory. While it may not be easy to outright prove, it's very hard to disprove. It tells us a lot about Sheldon, and adds an interesting layer of depth to his character and his impact on the others, not to mention a few major events in the show, and that's why I've given it second place. And before we move on to first place, I'd like to go through some honourable mentions, theories that didn't quite make the cut but that I enjoy. The Cooper Stinson theory, which theorises that Sheldon is Barney Stinson in an alternate universe. Not quite enough evidence for me, but a fun idea. The Hermit theory, which suggests Sheldon created all the characters in his head to essentially practice social interaction. The problem with this is it just negates everything for me, but it is interesting and does make some sense. Emily the serial killer. Fairly self-explanatory, not quite enough evidence, and I'm not sure what it would actually add to the show. Interstellar theory, which suggests that Cooper in Interstellar is the grandson of Sheldon Cooper. I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense. It could even be true, but it doesn't add anything to the Big Bang Theory for me. It tells us more about the movie than the sitcom. It's all in Leonard's head. This is a popular theory, and it makes more sense than it being in Sheldon's head because Leonard is emotionally evolved enough to potentially write all of these characters. But it completely negates everything in the show, and so I generally don't like these theories enough for them to make my top 10. It's possible, but for me it's a bit like when people say nothing is real. I mean maybe, but that idea is so big that it actually just doesn't really change anything. It kind of ruins it. And lastly, the dark Big Bang Theory. This was an early theory back in the early days of the show, which predicted that the main characters would end up going to the CERN super collider or something similar, and end up causing a Big Bang that ultimately ends the universe. This has now mostly been disproven because of the ending of the show, but it could be partially true thanks to this new device that causes problems in the new spin-off, Stuart Fails to Save the Universe, but only if the new show is canon, which we don't know yet. I guess we'll see, and a quick reminder, I'll be covering that show when it comes out next month. Anyway, back to the number one theory. The Seven Traumas theory is the name I've given to the amalgamation of individual theories pieced together, and together it explains an awful lot. The theory argues that the heart of the Big Bang Theory isn't a comedy about nerds and their relationships. Instead, it's about 7 deeply damaged people who slowly rebuild their lives through friendship, structure, and emotional support. Each character has been through a different kind of horror, a different kind of trauma. Sheldon's trauma begins early. His father dies when he is young, and he never fits into his environment. It is likely he is bullied way more than he lets on. The theory frames his rigid routines, emotional detachment, and need for control not just as personality traits, but as a defense mechanism against instability and loss. His obsession with predictability becomes a way of making a chaotic world feel safe. Leonard's home life is defined by emotional abuse. His mother, Dr. Beverly Hofstadter, is cold, analytical, and treats him more like a research subject than a child. The theory argues that this creates a lifelong pattern in Leonard. He seeks approval, over-explains himself, and tolerates emotional imbalance because it feels familiar. Even his relationships often mirror that imbalance between seeking love and expecting rejection. Now, Penny's trauma is not explicit, but if we incorporate the previous theory of witness protection into this one, it fits in very well. She comes from a difficult family background. She left Nebraska to escape something rather than simply pursue opportunity. Raj's struggle is often treated as comedic, but under this theory it reflects deeper psychosexual and identity-based issues, which link back to the theory we had in 9th place. His inability to speak to women, dependence on alcohol for social interaction, and eventual relocation from India all point towards a character shaped by anxiety, repression, and cultural pressure. Like the other characters, he is running, and his arc is one of attempted self-reinvention that never fully stabilizes. Howard's trauma is rooted in abandonment. His father leaves when he is young, and he is raised by an extremely controlling and overbearing mother. Otherwise, his upbringing is extremely lonely. The result is a character who oscillates between insecurity and overcompensation. His need to prove himself through his humour and through his various achievements, such as going to outer space, can be seen as a response to emotional instability at home. Amy's upbringing is defined by emotional restriction and social isolation. The theory frames her early life as one where intellectual development was encouraged, but emotional and social development was severely limited, banned by her mother. Her mother is often described as controlling and abusive, and Amy herself frequently references years of loneliness and exclusion. Her transformation after joining the friendship group represents a rapid expansion into a life she was previously denied. Bernadette is the least explicitly defined in terms of childhood trauma, but the theory fills this gap by pointing to her extreme competitiveness, intensity, and occasional emotional volatility, and she briefly mentions being surrounded by gory police photos from her father when she was a baby. She is still part of the same social ecosystem, one where academic pressure, social comparison, and subtle bullying are almost inevitable. What ties all 7 characters together is not just individual trauma, but shared experience. Before forming the group, they are all socially isolated, and they are all intellectually or emotionally misaligned with the world around them, and of course they are all shaped by environments that did not fully accommodate them. The show treats these histories lightly, often through jokes or brief references, but when you step back, every single one of the 7 main characters is defined by loss, absence, and abuse, which is a lot more severe than the laugh track sitcom script would have you believe. 7 is not just a number, it's a symbolic structure. 7 is often religiously and culturally significant, and Chuck Lorre himself expressed interest in theology and spirituality. Okay, I know it's about in-world theories, but either way, 7 is seen as a complete cycle, a sense of wholeness. In this theory, there needs to be 7 damaged parts in order to form a new whole, a new life together. This would also explain why Raj is never given a long-term partner. Even at the end of the show, he is alone, because the show cannot exceed the lucky number 7. And to be fair, the writers even revealed a tendency towards superstition, when they explained the reason they didn't reveal Penny's surname was that they thought it might be unlucky. Anyway, with this theory, The Big Bang becomes a story about 7 people who are all, in different ways, fractured before they met, all running away from a dark past. 7 people who slowly learn how to function again by forming a substitute family. And the friendship at the centre of the show isn't just convenience or circumstance. I guess it's more like recovery. That's why this theory doesn't just explain character backgrounds, it also incorporates a few of the other top 10 theories. And that's why, in my opinion, it deserves the number 1 spot. And that's it, we're at the end. Thanks for watching the video. I want to make it clear that I'm not saying this order is correct. It's completely fine if you disagree with any of the theories I've chosen and where I've placed them. These are just my thoughts on the theories, but either way, hopefully you learned something new or found a new lens through which to view the show. As I said, I'm really excited about next week's video, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, click the notification bell, and follow on Instagram for updates. If you like this video, a thumbs up goes a long way. A quick shout out to my supporters on Patreon: Laura Starr, Beverly, Keegan Smith, Daniel, Casey, Carlos Diaz, and Greg Whitworth. Okay, thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.